I appreciate you being with me. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. All right, we're looking at Romans chapters 5 through 8, since they are directly parallel to 1 Corinthians 15 and Paul's discussion. In Paul's discussion in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 56, he said, the sting of death is sin. Now, I want to repeat this really simple axiom, okay? Since sin is the sting of death, if you deal with sin, you've dealt with death. It is that simple. So I will repose the question that I asked you to think about in the last video and even before that. If sin is the sting of death, i.e., when sin is dealt with, that is the resurrection, then why is it and how is it that the child of God, forgiven of sin, thus having no sin, how is it that the child of God, forgiven of that and only that which brings death, still has to die biologically if the death of Adam was biological death? I mean, this question must be answered. And the so-called answers that some of the great scholars of the world have offered really are frightening in a sense. But again, we're going to be discussing that as we continue, but not here. We're in Romans chapter 5, where Paul said, remember, wherefore as by one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, so then death passed upon all men because all men sinned. Now, Paul then makes an astounding statement. And he says, until law, it's not the law, but it is until law, sin was in the world. But sin is not imputed when there is no law. Now, what in the world does Paul mean by that? Because Paul is going to tell us in the very next verse that death and sin reigned from Adam to Moses. Well, if sin and death reigned from Adam to Moses, and if there was no law of any kind, how could Paul say that sin and death reigned during that period of time? I mean, after all, here you've got Adam. God gave him the law. Don't eat the fruit. He sinned, he died. Some people are saying, oh, well, see, there was no law from Adam to Moses, therefore there could not have been any sin. That's ridiculous, and is not the force of what Paul is saying. Let me ask you a question. When Cain killed Abel, was that a sin? Well, God certainly viewed it as a sin. He banished him. He punished him. When every thought and every intent of man in Genesis chapter 6 through 9 was to do evil continually. Well, how do you know it's evil if there's not a knowledge of good and evil? And yet here in the pre-flood period, every thought, every intent of man was to do evil continually. Let me see. Did God punish the Noahic world for their wickedness? Oh, I think it's fair to say he punished that world. After the flood, was it okay to steal? Was it okay to lie? Was it okay to murder? No. We have example after example after example of men sinning. Now, was the Mosaic law in place? Nope. Because, death reigned from Adam to Moses. until Moses, until the law of Moses. So the law of Moses was not from Adam onward. And so if somebody wants to argue, which some unfortunately are doing, if someone wants to argue there was no sin until the Mosaic law entered, it's simply false. There's no ground to it. So how then did those individuals sin against God, commit iniquity? How in the world did they commit abominations? It's because they violated the heart of God. It is because the heart of God had communicated to them in some way, some fashion, although not explicitly like that in the case of Adam, as in a thou shalt not, but they still knew it. They knew what was right and they knew what was wrong. To me, the only satisfactory answer is that it was the nature and the character of God that had been communicated to them to such an effect that they knew, hey, it's wrong to murder. It's wrong to lie. It's wrong to steal. It's wrong to commit adultery. And you know, it's absolutely amazing to me that some people are saying that sin had no power, sin could not kill until the law of Moses. Folks, if sin could not kill, and if sin did not, number one, if sin did not exist separate and apart from the law of Moses, then how did sin reign from Adam to Moses? And if sin did not kill outside and independent of the law of Moses, then how did death reign from Adam to Moses? And, by the way, if there is no sin where there is no law of Moses, then that means that the heinous crime in San Antonio, Texas, why? When that gunman walked into that church and killed 25 people, injured however many more, he wasn't sinning. No. I mean, that's a social injustice, but he wasn't really sinning. Are you kidding me? Are we asked to believe such an incredibly illogical doctrine that says murder is no longer sin since the law of Moses does not exist? Well, let me reiterate. Sin existed prior to the law of Moses. Death reigned from Adam to Moses, which means death reigned without the law of Moses. But the law of Moses entered and did what? Made sin and death abound. It magnified the problem of sin, which pre-existed before Moses, and it magnified the problem of death, which existed before the law of Moses. That's Romans 5:20 and 21. Sin did not enter through Moses. Death did not enter through Moses. Sin and death abounded because of the law of Moses. Now, I hope you can begin to see that Paul is incorporating the story of Adam into the story of Moses and the law. These are not two separate stories. So when we look at the death introduced through Adam, that was clearly not biological death, as we demonstrated in the last session. That means that the death that was exacerbated through the law of Moses, by the law of Moses, was not biological death. The things that the law of Moses pointed to, defined, described, and condemned, magnified the problem of sin and death. It didn't create it. It magnified it. And we got more on this important issue as we continue. All right, we have more. We'll see you on the flip side.